It's hour 2 of Overdrive here on TSN 1050. We're up on TSN 4. Hey, Mom. I'm Aaron Korolnek. That's my man, Frank Corrado. Very busy hour ahead on the program. Frank, Chris Johnston, our hockey insider, out of his summer hiatus, has returned from the cottage. He's back grinding Maple Leafs content, and a lot of content again to today, considering the Leafs' big announcement, Sheldon Keefe. 2-year contract extension with the club.
Yeah, and listen, no one was really expecting this to happen at this point. They could have let him go into the season and play it out, and, you know, his contract was going to expire, but he must have done something here in the time that he's met Brad Treliving now to convince him that he should be the guy for the next 2 years. And yes, I know we always talk about it with coaches, is there's not many lame duck guys, and there's always a year or two prior to them getting fired, but listen, Sheldon Keefe he's a good guy. He's a good coach. He's got a great regular season track record, and I think Brad Treliving has recognized that and decided to keep him around in the fold.
Treliving was asked in a Zoom interview this afternoon about how much input the players had in a conversation like this with regards to Keefe and the extension. He was a little ambiguous with his answer. Oh, you know, I try to consider any and all options with regards to a decision like this to extend the coach. But you're somebody who played for Sheldon Keefe. You know what makes him tick. Maybe not at the NHL level, but certainly at the AHL level. Would you consider him to be a player's coach? You think he would be somebody that the Matthews, the Marners, the Nylanders, the Tavares would be supporting to keep around long term?
I do. I would put it this way. He's not a country club coach, right? Okay. Like where you think you're just going to show up to the rink and, hey, there might not be video today. It's very relaxed. You know, do your workout whenever you want and just, you know, hop onto the ice and we'll get practice going. He's not that kind of player's coach, but what he is he's going to talk to his star players and he's going to have input from them as far as, okay, how do you guys feel in this situation? What do you think the power play needs? You guys are the ones doing it. Like ultimately, a coach can have a clear description as far as what he wants and communicate that to the player, like have a vision for things. But you can only get so far as a coach because you're not on the ice. You don't have the feel for it in game. So if you include players and get certain amounts of input or like in that regard, that's going to help you as a coach. So I think he's a great communicator. He's very specific in what he wants, but he is demanding at the same time. So I don't know if you want to call that a player's coach, but it's not one of those country club kind of loosey-goosey things.
One thing a couple of things I'm really fascinated by when we're heading into this Maple Leaf season with regards to Keefe and the coaching staff in particular. So number one, Kyle Dubas is gone. What that means for Keefe, his approach, just how tied in he was with Dubas and his methods of, you know, putting together a hockey team and how that team plays. But of course, Guy Boucher, part of the coaching staff, former coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Mike Van Ryn, longtime NHLer. He's part of the coaching staff this year as well. So there's definitely a different vibe heading into the season. Of course, the Kyle Dubas absence would be the biggest change of all. And I think that'll be the biggest reflection as far as what this team is this season as compared to past seasons, how they play under Treliving and now under Keefe without Dubas and his jurisdiction. But I don't think you can really understate guys like Boucher and Van Ryn, the impact that they could make, because we've seen the Toronto Maple Leafs assistant coaches, it seems year after year, become head coaches the following year.
Well, guys keep getting plucked. Carberry just got plucked. Hackstall got plucked. McFarland went with him. DJ Smith, exactly. Jimmy Hiller's, he's been in LA for a long time, is with the Islanders. Like, that is a good sign when you have assistant coaches that keep getting plucked and guys are turning into head coaches. Another thing I would say about this Sheldon Keefe thing is, you know, remember when that all or nothing thing came out and we got to see the behind the scenes of Sheldon Keefe in the meetings, in the rooms, and it was different because it was a bubble year. So there were certain challenges that came with that. But so many times he was pushing playoff mentality, right? Like we heard it over and over again. Didn't matter what point of the season they were in. He kept hammering that home. And my point with this is, just like players need to learn and develop, and they need time and they need runway for that to happen, coaches are just the same. So Sheldon Keefe is learning year after year after year, and there's things that he probably likes that he's done in the past. There's things he probably looks back at it and says, I didn't like that. Why was I doing that? But he's learning, right? So, you know, you give up on coaches early. It's just like giving up on players early. So giving him a little more runway here in Toronto does make sense with this group. Listen, we'll see if he gets there. They could have a terrible start, and he could be gone. That could very well be the case.
There's pretty good chance that happens based on the last couple of years, right? They seemingly have bad starts every year. And the first person who's called into question is always Sheldon Keefe. Now,
that was ridiculous last year, though.
Yeah.
I thought Sheldon Keefe last year should not have been the fall guy for that group's shortcomings.
Sure, and listen, that's fair, but I mean, the way that professional sports is going, like look even in our city, John Schneider, a ton of heat for the performance of the Toronto Blue Jays. Like it's his problem that Vlad Jr. and Springer and Varsho, all these guys aren't hitting. You look at the Toronto Raptors, Nick Nurse, he's out. He's out. They had a bad season, and say what you will about kind of how it all went down, but it's often the coach who faces the brunt
easiest one to change.
That's exactly it.
You trade Bo Bichette, you trade Vladdy, you got to answer a lot of questions. You want to trade Marner and Matthews, you got to answer some hard questions, and that's tough on your reputation. But at the end of the day, Sheldon Keefe getting extended for 2 years, he's obviously convinced Brad Treliving that he's the right guy, and he's impressed him.
Well, our next is the right guy to have a conversation about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Joining us now on the Maple Toyota Hotline, our hockey insider. He's making his return. Summer's over, Chris Johnston. Welcome back to TSN 1050. What's going on?
Well, it's great to be here. I'm going to be a little rusty, and I'm also a little confused with the Jays having a comfortable lead right now. So
That's
I don't
true.
know what's going
on. I don't think anyone knows what's going on. That's a very uncommon thing for the Jays, even against a lowly opponent like the Washington Nationals. But, Chris, let's start with the big news this afternoon. Sheldon Keefe, a 2-year contract extension. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense, quite honestly. And you know, I understand where some people might be pointing to the playoffs, but it's pretty hard to ignore a coach at Sheldon Keefe's age with the record he has, you know, back-to-back 50-win seasons for the team. And, you know, he's really had to go out and basically re-earn the job he already had. I mean, remember when Brad Treliving was hired, you know, back in the spring, you know, they had 17 or 18 hours of meetings before the GM was even sure if he was going to move forward with the head coach. And I do think that, you know, once that decision was made, that it really wouldn't behoove anyone to bring Keefe back this season, you know, in a lame duck situation. Let's face it, you know, what these contract extensions represent is financial security for Sheldon and his family. He's got 3 years now on his deal. The Leafs can still remove him at any time if they decide to get to that point. But I think it's best for him to have the vote of confidence from the organization publicly like this, and to go into another season in which obviously the performance of the team and his own performance will be judged pretty closely.
CJ, Sheldon Keefe has always been attached to Kyle Dubas. He's brought in as a Kyle Dubas guy. It was in Sault Ste. Marie, it was with the Marlies, it was with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, when you look at the way this extension went down, is it fair to say that Brad Treliving has been impressed by Sheldon Keefe and thinks he's the right guy? Or is this more just Treliving looking at it saying, I don't want my players to have a distraction for this year. I'll just give this guy a 2-year extension and we'll figure out the rest from there?
Well, I'll take Treliving on his word on that one. I mean, really, he's been clear that he's been impressed with what he's seen from Sheldon Keefe. He had Keefe talk to all the UFAs the Leafs signed before those contracts went down. You know, he's been involved, you know, now for three months or whatever it is, and sort of day-to-day planning, going over last season, trying to find ways that the team can be better. They've rounded out the coaching staff and brought in Guy Boucher to be part of this staff. I mean, a lot of it's kind of happened now, I think, between the coach and GM, and you know, there's a comfort that comes with that. I mean, Brad Treliving probably knows Sheldon Keefe better than a lot of the players at this point, just because of the timing of when he was hired and the fact that they've had to go through a lot of different things together already. And you know, he's impressed him in that time. And you know, I still think back to that very first press conference with Treliving where he mentioned from afar watching how the Leafs had become a better defensive team, the way some of their top players had committed to you know, both sides of the puck rather than the offensive side, you know, the sort of transition you expect young high-end offensive players to have to go through. And you know, he chalked that up to coaching. And so I think all those things combined with the offshoot benefit being that we're not all going to be focused on it if the Leafs go through a 3-game losing streak, you know, probably make this the right move. And, you know, 2 years too is pretty sensible. I think if it was a 1-year extension, it would seem a little bit tepid. But, you know, it's only 3 seasons. It's not a huge, you know, I think that the job is pretty clear. It's nice for Sheldon and his family, but nothing is guaranteed even with this extension.
TSN hockey insider Chris Johnston, our guest. We're talking about Sheldon Keefe's 2-year contract extension with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I do sit here, it's August the 30th, September right around the corner, and think about the fact that Sheldon Keefe has a contract extension and Kyle Dubas is running things in Pittsburgh. I still, like, if you told me that, at the end of the season after the Leafs lost in 5 to Florida, I don't think anybody on the planet would have believed that to be the case, but it is indeed the case. And Chris, I am curious, based on the information that you have, was there any contemplation from Tree Living to explore any other coaches prior to making this commitment to Keefe?
I don't think so, no. I mean, certainly back in the very early days of his hiring, there was a lot on the plate, whether it was the Matthews extension or all the other players that had, organizational decisions, on July 1st, and then Keefe was lumped in with that. But, from that point on, once they decided to go forward and formally announce that they're bringing him back, I think that the focus has just been there. And this is the other side of this. I mean, who are you going to hire? I mean, who out there that could be available, could be had? If you're running the team right now, would you have comfort in thinking that it's an upgrade? And I believe that when you go through that process, as Tree Living certainly did, I'm sure in those early days, there's not an obvious answer. And in fact, if you have the right guy, why let him go? And, sometimes we get into change for change's sake in the sport. I know it happens, but, I don't know that there's necessarily evidence that the Leafs have, plateaued under Sheldon. I see a team that's moved forward in a lot of ways. I know it gets taken away a little bit because the way they lost to Florida in the second round of the playoffs, but they also did win a playoff series last year. And so, sometimes patience is the hardest thing to have when you're running a sports organization, but there's lots of examples over time. Tampa didn't go out and fire John Cooper when they were swept in the first round, and they went on and won 2 cups immediately after that. So I think sometimes that patience makes sense. And in this case, I just don't know that there was anyone that was available to be hired that was an improvement for the Leafs.
So if we were taking a look at Brad Tree Living's checklist, once he took the role as general manager for the Maple Leafs, Austin Matthews, a contract extension at the top of that list for sure. He got that done. Of course, Sheldon Keefe now a 2-year contract extension. Do you think maybe, considering those two things are now completed, he may look at something with William Nylander, or is that still a status quo situation?
Well, it still seems to be a status quo situation. That's not to say that the Leafs, don't have interest in extending William Nylander. I think that William Nylander certainly has interest in signing in Toronto, but, it seems to be one where some time is going to have to play out before, you see movement from one side or the other. And look, there's still a fair bit of time here. It's almost 3 weeks, give or take, till the start of training camp. And then, camp goes for a few weeks. I mean, Leafs don't play a meaningful game for a fair bit here. And you can always do these extensions during the season, which we've seen happen repeatedly, whether it was David Pastrnak last year. And so, I think that this one is probably going to have to breathe a little bit unless one side or the other has a dramatic change of heart. And I don't necessarily think, as much as it's going to be focused on and discussed from people that do our jobs, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily pretend to a negative outcome here, but it's probably that last major item on the checklist that hasn't been addressed. And it's been a pretty busy tenure when you consider all the change, maybe in the secondary parts of this roster with the Matthews extension. Now this getting Sheldon Keefe in place and his coaching staff. I mean, a lot of work's been done, and there's one big item that's still left out there to be addressed.
CJ, as far as Sheldon Keefe's mindset coming into this season, he's not going to have Kyle Dubas as his general manager. He obviously has Brad Tree Living now. I look back at a point last season where they played the Arizona Coyotes, and essentially Sheldon Keefe said something along the lines of, their star players played better than our star players. He essentially called out their star players, but I thought it was fair criticism at the time. He ended up walking those comments back. Like, I wonder this year, do you think with Tree Living in the fold, with some different players in the fold, do you think there's just like a different mentality from Sheldon Keefe where he's like, I'm not walking anything back. I said it and I meant it, and you guys need to be better on the ice?
Well, I mean, I don't think we'd be questioning his authority if he did say something like that again. It's hard for me to predict how Sheldon will navigate those circumstances. Obviously, he's a few years into the job, but he's learning things as well about his craft and maybe about the way some of those comments get taken and twisted and how it gets presented, in the media. So I don't know how he'll approach those situations, but I was with you at the time. It was a pretty candid comment, but it wasn't wrong. I mean, really what he was saying is the Leafs had, much better high-end players than the Coyotes if you match the rosters up. But on that particular night, it didn't give the Leafs the advantage you would expect. And that's kind of the heat you take when you're making $12 million or $11 million in a hard cap league. I think that there is an understanding you have to carry a disproportionate amount of the load in order for the entire project to work. And if you look at the end of the year, a lot of those Leafs players did carry a lot of the load. I know Matthews was injured, but Nylander ends up with 40 goals. Mitch Marner leads the team in scoring. I mean, a lot of those players did come through when it mattered. And so I don't think there's any evidence really that impacted their ability to perform. It gave us a couple days of good content, and maybe Sheldon will be a little more careful next time about what he says publicly versus, obviously those kind of messages are consistently being delivered behind the scenes, at given points of the schedule.
In conversation with our hockey insider, Chris Johnston, here on Overdrive, Aaron Korolnek and Frank Corrado with you this afternoon. Some pictures emerging of Connor Bedard and Connor McDavid working out together. And, I think there's a lot of people who are excited to see what Bedard's able to do this season, myself included. What do you think realistic expectations should be for Bedard in his rookie season, Chris?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's hard not to see the way he consistently scored from the minute he was in the Western Hockey League, to see what he accomplished, at the World Juniors wearing the Team Canada sweater, and not think that this guy is going to step into the NHL, and even on a team, in Chicago that obviously lacks really the kind of quality around him for them to be making noise as an organization. I mean, I think he's going to play a lot of minutes. He's going to play on the power play. And the record here is pretty clear. I mean, we've seen Sidney Crosby had 100-plus points in his rookie season. Ovechkin, too. McDavid got injured in his rookie year, but was scoring at a pretty ridiculous rate. I mean, I think that he can be a point-per-game type of guy. And, I don't know if that's realistic or if that's maybe a little unfair to put on his shoulders, but, this doesn't look to be just another prospect entering the league. It's not just another number one overall pick. I mean, that's, certainly there's different, levels you see with players taking that position. I mean, this particular player has basically done anything you'd want to do by the age of 17. And so, it's not easy to walk into the NHL. I think there's going to be some long nights in Chicago for him and some adjustment, but you see his quads in that particular in that particular gym shot that you're talking about. I mean, clearly he's a well-tuned athlete. He's got lots of reason to be confident, and I think he's going to get an opportunity to play huge minutes and important minutes for Chicago. And so, I think somewhere 70 points or up for me is where I would slot him, and then I might be being a little bit modest. Honestly, it could be even more than that.
CJ, you were the one that broke the Austin Matthews extension. You had the number 13.25. I think one of the players around the NHL that was most curious as far as what that number was going to be was Elias Pettersson, because he's going into the last year of his deal. He's a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. And it's a weird situation in Vancouver where, they didn't really strip it down. They actually have kind of acquired pieces because they want to stay relevant and make the playoffs. But now you look at, there's Sebastian Aho at 9.75. There's Austin Matthews at 13.25. If this guy puts together another 100-point season and he's a very responsible defensive center, he's somewhere in there. What's your level of concern if you're the Vancouver Canucks, though, that you don't have a good enough team and this guy wants to bolt town?
Well, I think there's maybe like a healthy amount of discomfort with that fact. I don't get any sense that Elias Pettersson's looking to leave Vancouver, but I think he's made it quite clear that he needs to see more before he's willing to commit to staying there. And that organization has to take a step forward this year, for a whole bunch of reasons. This becomes maybe the most important one, given that he's up for a contract next year. He is still a restricted free agent next summer, so it's somewhat different, from a Matthews circumstance, or even what the Leafs will face with William Nylander here, where, he's a potential UFA in 2024. And so, there's maybe more urgency to get that kind of guy signed. But, Pettersson has a lot of leverage in this negotiation. I think ultimately the outcome he wants is in line with the organization, and that he'd like to remain a member of the Canucks. But, the years go by quickly in a career, and I think he needs to feel comfortable that they're going to have a chance to win, that they're taking a step forward in the period of time when he would be signing that extension. And that's sort of the dynamic I see playing out. And, as for him being excited by Matthews, I think all the top players should be excited every time the bar gets raised. I mean, whether it's Leon Draisaitl, who can do a contract extension next summer at Edmonton, Connor McDavid's a couple years away from his next deal. There's a few players. Maybe it'll be Connor Bedard in a couple years' time when he's doing his second deal that'll benefit from this. But we're going to see, I think, more guys leapfrog Matthews in the coming seasons, in part because there's other great players out there that need contracts, but also the cap starts going up again in summer 2024. And so this was a mini step forward, I think, for players overall, but I think that they're going to see more and more guys pushing that ceiling up.
CJ, thank you for doing this. This may have been your first radio hit in a long time, but you said you were a little rusty, but I'm telling you, my friend, you were in mid-season form. Thank you for this. We'll do it again soon.
All right. Be well, guys. Thank you.
Chris Johnston, our hockey insider, who joined us on the Maple Toyota hotline. Build your next dream Toyota at Maple Toyota and check out Maple Toyota's pre-owned inventory arriving daily. It's time to Toyota. Visit mapletoyota.com. CJ mentioning Connor Bedard's quads. Like Quadzilla. Absolute machine.
Dude, his quads are larger than your torso.
Yeah. You know the shot of Marty St. Louis' quads that went viral, I think probably towards the end of his career. Absolute unit was Marty St. Louis. Bedard's 18 years old. The guy's built like a Greek god. I mean, I can't wait to see what he does. And I would not be surprised, and I know I'm encroaching on O-Dog's territory. He loves Bedard more than anyone. Thinks he's going to be, a top 5 player really quickly in the National Hockey League. I am in complete and total agreement. And it doesn't only have to do with those large quads he has, Frank.
No, you know what? The gifted players in the NHL, there always is that something about them, that quality. I was very lucky. I played a very short while with Sidney Crosby. I got to see how he operates on a day-to-day basis. No one works harder than this guy. He will not be outworked by anyone on another team, on his own team. He'll grab you after practice. He says, I need you to pass me this puck, put it in the air, give me... Like, he wants to do things, and he kind of just says, like, hey, you're doing it with me. So he brings guys in like that. Austin Matthews came in as an 18-year-old, man-child. Like, similar to you're talking about Bedard. Like, Matthews was built like a man at 18 years old. There was that one factor for him. Bedard, this kid, like, I've been talking myself into 65, 70 points. Let's not set the bar too high for this kid. Let's keep it realistic. But I'm kind of like, I've been watching these clips in the summer. Listen, it's summer, but he's playing against NHLers, but you're like, could be just one of those things where he's a point per game right away.
Yeah, and I think back to Jack Hughes' rookie season with New Jersey, and he was a small, skinny kid and couldn't hang in the NHL physically, and he has an offseason, takes a big step, and look what Jack Hughes is now, one of the top 10, 15 players in the National Hockey League. But the difference is with Bedard, he's already a physical freak, and he scored, 76 goals in the Western Hockey League.
All this guy did was score goals
ridiculous.
Right away. Before he even started in the Western Hockey League, he went over to Sweden, so he would have been 14 maybe, and he was playing under 20 games at 14. He was the best player on the ice.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and then he started his WHL career, and all he did was score.
Who was the biggest beast in the gym that you saw in your National Hockey League career?
Tom Wilson would be up there. Darnell Nurse would be up there. Barclay Goodrow in New York. That guy could lift a house. So I'm serious.
Like, man, the squats and the deadlifts, those are that's the NHL
squats
workout.
And deadlifts. Like, listen, guys are pushing 400 plus. Like, it's not uncommon. Where it gets me is like when guys are pushing big numbers on the bench press, because a lot of us are like, taller, lankier guys with big wingspans. But then you see a guy just rip off 250 pounds a bunch of times, and you're like, dude, you're a hockey player. Right?
It's an NFL linebacker type move. At the combine, they're benching 225 by 30.
Yeah,
and you're looking at these guys like, what is going on?
Oh, it's outrageous.
Yeah, that is something special. No.
Well, and it sucks too when you're not one of those guys, and the bench press is set up. There's a few different racks, and you're at the beginner one.
You mind if I take that 45 off? Just one of those as opposed to 3?
Let's save some time and not take the weights on and off. We'll just set up a different rack for you guys that are skin and bones.
Yeah, that's probably the right course of action when it comes to what you should probably do. But anyways, Frank, you're a beast. You're a big boy still. Don't
no.
Maybe losing it a little bit post career, but you still hit the golf ball very well. You're Frank DeChambeau. You're never going to lose that nickname.
Yeah. We'll take it.
Yeah, we will.
I don't want to talk about it. I didn't drive the ball very well yesterday, and O-Dog was disappointed in me.
You're still hitting it far, though.
Yeah, but he's like, you need to put your old driver back in the bag. So
probably take advice.
It might be coming back.
We'll talk to John Herdman, the new coach of Toronto FC, on the other side. An Overdrive exclusive. That coming up. Mark Schlereth, Rich Griffin following the Jays and the Nationals as well. A very busy hour ahead on Overdrive. You're listening to the show on TSN 1050, watching on TSN 4. The boys will be back next week. For now, today, tomorrow, it's myself, Aaron Korolnek, and Frankie Corrado with you here on Overdrive until 7 o'clock. We'll talk to John Herdman, the new coach of Toronto FC, in just a moment here, who I imagine, Frank, was wined and dined by Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, Bill Manning, the president of Toronto FC, because to recruit someone like Herdman, a guy who has a ton of cachet in the soccer world, especially in our country, it can't be easy. It's not like, all right, John, here's a flight charter, or you fly economy in the middle of seat 11C, come on over. We'll send you an Uber.
Stuff.
Private bird, and I can't even fathom what it must be like to experience that. You were a MLSE employee for a brief period of time. My guess is John Herdman's experience a little bit different. Let's welcome him in. He is the new head coach of Toronto FC. It's John Herdman with us here on Overdrive. Congratulations, John. How are you?
I'm good, Aaron. How are you doing, Frank?
We're all good. We're all good, John. We love when people address us by name, too. It gives us a sense of vindication. So let me ask you this. Take us through how it all works behind the scenes. My understanding is that someone from your camp reached out to Toronto FC, and it's a mutual interest. And how did it all proceed and lead up to the point where you're taking over the head honcho with the soccer club here in Toronto?
Yeah, I think, since we qualified for the World Cup way back in March 2022, there'd been a lot of interest from my agency. I'd signed with a new agency, 1010, which is a British agency, and they've had a mission to try and progress my career at the right time. So there's been a lot of different options that have came in, and I was at the Gold Cup, and my agent reached out and said he'd contacted TFC because he felt that opportunity was an absolute bullseye for my profile, which is taking over, I guess, teams that are struggling and rebuilding them. And some great connection with Jason Hernandez, Bill Manning, Larry Tannenbaum. Yeah, I mean, it was a really, cool process to get to speak to some key players in MLS and big sporting figures. So, we hit it off. The relationship was pretty solid with what they could see in my profile, and ultimately, my question was, what do you think you need? And I think I fit that bill.
So it's been pretty well documented here in Toronto about how disappointing of a season it's been for Toronto FC. Like, when you look at this group and what's ahead, how much heavy lifting needs to be done with this team in order to get, where you want to be in the MLS standings?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a difficult season. There's no doubt there for the fans, for the players, the staff. No one wants to be in the situation they're in. And I think there's an excitement and optimism that I'll get a chance to come in that last, 3-4 weeks of the season to assess, to understand, and that's an important part. You've really got to seek to understand before you can be understood, and I think MLSE and Toronto FC have given us that runway to figure it out, to speak to the players, speak to the staff, and touch anything that involves winning and try and understand how we make sure that when that new season comes, we're ready to go, and this club's able to reach that level that I think everyone knows it should be reaching.
John Herdman is our guest. He is the new head coach of Toronto FC, and there's been a lot of reporting, John, I'm sure you're well aware of this, about how things have gone down between you and Canada Soccer over the last 6 months or so. Reports of rifts between you and some of the players. Let's go to the source right now. What can you tell us about those reports, and just how accurate are they?
Yeah, I think my players came out yesterday and spoke pretty strong. I think the rifts have been pretty clear from, qualifying for the World Cup, players going on strike, cancellation of FIFA windows. There's been a bit of a challenge, I think, internally, and not a cool place to work, I think, for myself or my staff for a period of time. I think coaches want to coach and they want to coach teams that are focused on what they have to do on the pitch, not focused on what they have to do off it. So I think that's probably all I want to say about the past. And when it comes to the players, I mean, to see Milan Bojan's name used in a report, and I was embarrassed, really embarrassed about that situation, and I really hope that that little bit of lazy journalism, the journalist is able to apologise to Milan at some stage, because that couldn't have been further from the truth. So, and that's even speaking to Milan over the last 2 days, who was devastated to see, that sort of rubbish written. So there's always agendas in sport, and, people have always got to take an angle, and, they couldn't have been further from the truth. And I think my players have backed that up. There's no way that in my time I've ever been in a position where I've had a break up with a player. We've always maintained respect, integrity, and I think for me we need a breath of fresh air. There's no doubt, and I think for this group, I've been with them for 5 years, so things do get a little bit tired over time, and you have to keep reinventing yourself. But to say that after qualifying for our first Nations League final in our history, and our first final in 20 years, to say there's a rift is, I think it's pretty desperate, to be honest.
John Herdman is our guest. So with regards to the notion, some have suggested this was a possibility that you could coach both the Canadian men's team and Toronto FC. Was that something that was ever discussed?
No, I was very clear in my mind that, I was breaking from Canada Soccer. It was that clear in my mind that I'd done my time with that organisation. I'd had 12 great years. Things had become strained over the last, year and a half, with all of the things around the back room and, some of the elements around the leadership and where we're at financially. So, I made my comments clear, and, I think that's all I need to say about the past. The past is the past. I'm excited for a great future with what is a wonderful club, and a club that I believe is going to reach the levels its fans want to reach. And what a privilege to be a custodian over this period of time.
Well, John, it may not have been an exciting season so far for TFC, but it's been a very exciting season down in Miami with the addition of Lionel Messi. I wonder if you look at that situation as a new coach coming in, looking to turn things around, and the track record you have, and you start thinking, like, that could be us. Like, we could be that team. Is that something that you've thought about here with Messi's emergence in MLS?
I mean, that was part of the excitement for sure, and coming on to an East Coast MLS club. As I say, that there were options we were considering, and the MLS on the East Coast to get that opportunity, be part of this whole movement, which is going to involve, I think, more and better players coming into the league, which will just strengthen it. I think this is a league that has been growing over the last 10 years. It's remarkable to see the facilities, the stadia, and now the best player to have ever played the game that I've had a chance to watch is in our league. So when I look at TFC, I've competed against Tata Martinez when he was the Mexico coach. So I'm looking forward to locking horns with him in battle and hoping that, again, we can attract, that level of player at Toronto FC. And I think that's going to be critical, that we absolutely ensure we get the right players through the door to lead us to this next level.
John Herdman's with us. Effective October the 1st, he will become the head coach of Toronto FC in MLS. Now, Frank mentioned how it's been a really difficult season for the club this past year. Of course, Lorenzo Insigne, Bernadeschi, those are the two big designated players for Toronto FC at this point in time. What are their futures, and what type of impact will you have in the decision-making with regards to the roster?
Yeah, I mean, too early for me to say. I mean, these are world-class players, players that have played at the highest levels of the sport. They've won some of the biggest titles you can win. So I always think it's a privilege when you have people of that caliber in your environment. So for me, I'm excited to meet these people, to find out more about them as people, and to find out what motivates them and how they think they can help this city reach that next level and bring the fans exactly what they need, which is success, winning. So that's going to take time. At this moment in time, I get 3 weeks to sort of assess from afar and do the right thing with Canada Soccer and exit, 12 years of work there, putting it down properly for the people that are going to come and take over. And then in October, that's where I'll get a little bit more hands-on in and around the environment and start some of those conversations about the future. So let's say it's going to take some time, and myself and Jason Hernandez, they'll be working together to build the rosters. What I know with Jason is he's got a lot of commitment, a lot of experience, and he's desperate to get it right. And from our side coming in, he's well aware of the clarity and the profiles that we want to see at the club, but also the characters we want to see there, the right people, the character traits, the values that, represent our city well.
John, whenever I hear you speak, I always get fired up, man. I got to be honest, I'm fired up for Toronto FC in the future after hearing you join us here on Overdrive. Congratulations again. We really appreciate your time. Enjoy the next month, and you'll get to work on October the 1st. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
That is John Herdman, coach of Toronto FC, who I will say, Frank, is content gold for us here in Toronto sports because, he does not hold back. Croatia, and man, he was not holding back with regards to some of the reporting on his exit.
Don't you appreciate that, though, about some of the other sports where there's certain figures and they're like, I'm just going to tell it exactly how I feel, and I'm not really worried about anything that comes with it. Good for him. Like,
dude, I love John
Herdman. Great. I think, by the way,
Herdman.
Nice touch by John addressing us by our first name. At that moment, I was like, I want to run through a brick wall for this guy.
Well, and that's the association with Herdman is that he's someone who inspires. And you could hear it. Like, you even watch all the pre-game, post-game availabilities leading up to the World Cup, during the World Cup, after the World Cup. When that guy talks, I mean, I just get fired up. Yeah. And I'm sure you've had so many coaches throughout your career in the National Hockey League and otherwise where you're like, wow, this person is a motivator. And, sometimes, and I don't know if that's the case necessarily with the end of his tenure with the Canadian men's team, that message can become stale. You kind of start rolling your eyes. You're like, all right, we get it. You've used these tactics before. But, I mean, it's pretty obvious with regards to Herdman coming in at Toronto FC that he's going to have a very significant voice. He has a goal in mind, and that's to win and win quickly. But at the same time, this is a guy that is someone who inspires.
Yeah.
And
that's his MO, right?
That's exactly
He's
it.
a motivator.
That's exactly
he inspires people. And if he surrounds himself with the right people who can get this team to play well tactically, that's a good combination. For me, like, he's right where he needs to be. I understand he was with Canada Soccer and all that stuff, 12 years.
Yep.
That was great. But if he was ever coming to the MLS, it had to be with Toronto. It had to be. And, we know about how strong financially MLSE is.
Yep.
Like, I envision a scenario where this guy's coming in, he's setting the tone, he's setting the culture, and at some point there's going to be a big name or multiple big names that come play for this team because of John Herdman and what he's established here.
So I think about how off the radar Toronto FC has been this year. And in part, it's due to how terrible they've been. They have the worst record in MLS. They're at the bottom of the table. They're nowhere close to competing. But there's also not a lot of buzz, and Bob Bradley and Terry Dunfield taking over from him. But now you have Herdman at the helm. This guy's going to be saying all these bombastic things and just drawing headlines. He'll be all over TSN all the time. And I think it's a fantastic hire. And I understand he doesn't have the MLS experience, the club experience. It's all been on the national level. But I believe in John Herdman. And clearly MLSE does too, because they were a full court press. Bill Manning, the president of Toronto FC, that was the guy they identified. They view it as a coup that they were able to bring in John Herdman.
Right.
I can't wait to see what team they field next year.
Well, and you know what happens on a lot of these international things? Like, the team needs to come together relatively quick and get on the same page. Well, who better than to get your team on the same page quick in a timely fashion than this guy, because he's used to doing it. So listen, it makes sense on a bunch of different levels. The profile that he brings, the motivation, the inspiration, all that kind of stuff. It's a no-brainer for him. It's a no-brainer for TFC. And like after watching this last little bit of TFC just be very disappointing, I think a lot of people look at this and have some hope for what this team could be with him at the helm.
Argos, TFC, a lot of excitement around those teams. The Leafs hired Sheldon Keefe. Extend Sheldon Keefe, I should say, a 2-year contract extension. Yeah, the Raps. I mean, there's a lot of buzz going on in Toronto sports right now.
Raptors make weird headlines. They're just
not a lot right now. Yeah. And of course, the Toronto Blue Jays, who win 7-0 over Washington. They take 2 of 3 over the Nats. We'll get to that with Rich Griffin, who will join us in about 45 minutes. 7-0. The Jays, they're back. We forget about the Alejandro Kirk pinch running, and
we didn't watch it, so it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't watch it. We were busy doing a live radio show. Aaron Korolnek, Frank Corrado with you until 7 p.m. You're listening to Overdrive on TSN 1050, watching on TSN 4. Thanks to John Herdman, the new coach of Toronto FC, for joining us. If you missed that interview or any part of Overdrive today or any day, you could find it anywhere podcasts are found. Aaron Korolnek, Frank Corrado with you until 7, or maybe I should call myself Aaron Gottfried, because
why?
There was a tweet that came in, and listen, I do morning radio, me and Carlo Koliakovo, first up, 6 to 10 a.m. here on TSN 1050, so I guess a lot of people don't know what I look like. There was one tweeter who said, why is Gilbert Gottfried hosting Overdrive? And I don't know if we have it up on TSN 4. That's old school Gilbert Gottfried. I mean, new school Gilbert Gottfried.
Actually close.
I mean, you know what? I kind of do look like Gilbert.
Can you yell and scream like that?
You know, like the sound he makes. You might do a better Gilbert Gottfried
I don't know if I do.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the Gilbert Gottfried. If you don't know what he sounds like, as soon as I did the impersonation, you definitely knew who I was referring to. But yeah, young Gilbert, decent looking man. Older Gilbert, oof. Like the jibs are like growing and growing.
So you're young Gilbert Gottfried Korolnek, basically.
I'll take it.
But you don't yell and scream.
No. Well, I did yesterday.
You're very articulate with what you say. You're not out here huffing and puffing, screaming at the top of your lungs.
There was a lot of screaming last night with the Jays game, I will say. I was going nuts. Going nuts, man. I was freaking out. Now, the Jays did win 7-0 today. So that's a good sign. They take 2 of 3 from Washington. But, you just think back, they lose 2 of 3 to Cleveland. Like last night was such a winnable game for the Toronto Blue Jays. Just such dumb errors, decision-making by both the players and, of course, the manager, John Schneider. But it all washes away with a 7-0 win. By the way, Chris Bassett today was unbelievable. 8 innings of shutout ball. That's the stopper type performance the Jays really needed.
Hey, that's great, but it's one game. We've seen this before where they have one game like that, and you're like, okay, turning point, this is it. They found it. They found what Seattle's found. Seattle's turned their season around. This is when the Jays are going to do it. And then they follow it up with another mediocre performance. If the Jays miss the playoffs this year, they will look back at this season and think, how many games did we leave on the table here because of our own unforced errors, whether it was coaching, whether it was in the field, whether it was at the plate, Espinal swinging at 3-0 counts, John Schneider not pinch running Alejandro Kirk. Like there's so many of these little events that have happened this year, and you're like, those things add up. And if they miss the playoffs, that's ultimately going to be the difference.
Lots of matinee baseball today. Houston up 7-0 on Boston. Man, they are just throttling the Sox, are the Astros, seemingly night after night. Oakland and Seattle knotted at 3 right now in the 7th inning. So we'll keep you up to date on that. That's a big game. Every game's big. Jays have, after today, 28 games remaining. They need to catch teams. I mean, there's 3 possibilities, being Houston, Texas, and the aforementioned Seattle Mariners, who are playing pretty good baseball, save the Rangers, who could easily turn it around. They had their swoon. Maybe now they're about to kind of go back on the ascent as opposed to the descent that they were on for the entire month.
Well, and that's the thing that's confusing about where this Jays team is at right now. It wasn't long ago, I think it was last week, Kevin Gausman was talking about how this team needs to play with urgency. They absolutely do need to play with urgency, but the urgency needs to come from the manager, the players, everyone involved. And it's interesting in a baseball clubhouse. I would imagine it's different than a hockey dressing room. Hockey dressing room, you talk about urgency. Guys kind of understand what that means. It's like we're finishing checks. We got to be first on pucks. Things of that nature. I don't know, in baseball, what does urgency mean for you? Like, if, I don't know, pitcher's got to throw more strikes. You got to swing more on. I don't know.
Maybe cash runners in scoring position occasionally.
That's great, but why? How's that any different than what you're doing on a normal basis?
That's true, and I don't really know how you would define that. Maybe Rich Griffin will know. He'll know. He's been covering the Toronto baseball scene for a long time.
We had Colabello, and we were asking him about like that 2015 team, right? Like, what were the talks like in the dressing room? He's like, we didn't need to say much, man. We did it from within. That's what this team is lacking.
Well, it's just 162 games, right? I mean, they play almost every day. Yeah. The Jays are off tomorrow before they head to Colorado for 3. Coors Field, better be teeing off there. That is a
home run central, baby.
Hitter's park. Yeah. You better be putting up some runs. Also, Colorado's pitching is terrible, in part because they pitch at home, or the guys who pitch at home pitch at Coors Field, which isn't helping anybody's case. But yeah, the Jays need to pick up a couple more wins this weekend at the minimum. Mark Schlereth talking some NFL in the final hour of the program, plus Rich Griffin on the Jays. 7-0 win over the Nats. Korolnek, Corrado, hour 3 of Overdrive is next.